we'd like to cover during lunch. We have a memoriam to Rolando Castañeda, who recently passed, a presentation on the student papers, and then our keynote speaker. So for the first item on the list, which is the memoriam, I'd like to invite Jorge Perez Lopez to come and provide the memoriam to Rolando.
I think many of you knew Rolando Castañeda. Rolando Castañeda was a friend, an economist, one of the founders of ASCE, a long-standing member. Rolando passed away in his home in Washington, D.C. On April 14th. It's a great loss for ASCE, for all of us, for his friends, of course for his wife. I wanted to say a few words about Orlando's sort of resume, and also a little bit about his contribution to ASCE to recognize his great presence in this organization. Orlando earned his BA in economics at the Universidad de Villanueva in La Habana in 1960, and then earned an MA in economics in 1964 at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras, and an MA also at Yale in 1966. He continued his studies for the PhD in Yale, at Yale rather. He didn't complete the degree, as I understand it, but he was an expert on monetary policy and econometrics, and very well respected economist. Orlando had a very distinguished experience working for international organizations and also universities. He worked for the Inter-American Development Bank as an economist for 27 years until he retired in 2002. Throughout that period, he occupied a number of senior positions supervising macroeconomic studies and country programs for several Latin American countries, as well as conducting ex-post country program evaluations. Before joining the IDB, he taught microeconomics, international trade, and statistics at the Universidad del Valle in Cali, Colombia, and also the Universidad de Puerto Rico at Rio Piedras. He also worked as a senior economist at the Organization of American States from 1970 to 74, and then at the Puerto Rico Planning Board. He was, as I mentioned earlier, a member of ASCE from the very beginning. I remember the very early sessions of ASCE in Washington and here in Miami, and Rolando being a constant presence in presenting studies. He also served on the board of ASCE several terms. He also was editor of the ASCE newsletter for a certain period of time. He was in charge of the website when websites were new things many years ago. Rolando was in charge of updating, and the website did a terrific job at that, as everything else. And of course, he's presented many interesting papers on macroeconomic issues, on comparisons of Cuba with other Latin American countries, which he knew very well from his work at the IDB, with countries in transition in Eastern Europe. He had a very broad set of skills, and he used it in producing many important papers that are in the ASCE proceedings, and of course they're available for anybody who would like to read them and learn from them. He also served as the president of the Staff Association of the Inter-American Development Bank, and he also contributed quite frequently to internet magazines like Cuba Encuentro and other media on specializing in Cuba. Anyway, he was a good friend, a fine colleague. I think several of us who live in the Washington area were able to attend his service and talk to his widow Alicia, who sometimes came to the meetings with him, and is a very fine person, and we express our condolences personally and also on behalf of ASCE. So I think it's important that we remember Rolando as a fine individual, a good friend, and a great contributor to ASCE. Elena, back to you, or maybe.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your lunch and our conference. I'm Mario Gonzalez Corso. I'm a professor of economics at the City University of New York. And today I have the privilege, the honor to present to you the students who won the ASCE student competition. But before we do that, I would like to begin by thanking Professor Enrique Kumar. As many of you know, Enrique has been organizing the student panel and the competition for more than 20 years. He's not here today. I would also like to mention the members of ASCE who volunteered to serve as the reviewers for the student papers. Many of them are unfortunately not here today, but I'll begin with Professor Loli Espino. Loli, if you could stand up. One of our members. Another member is Professor Jorge Romeo, also Professor Art Ritter, and Professor Mauricio Solaun. These individuals are members of ASCE. As you know, they're academics, and they played a crucial role in the committee that reviews the papers that we received. I also wanted to tell you that we were very lucky. We received a good number of papers, so it was a very strong competition. We have, as you will see, a very good list of candidates here and recipients of the award. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the students who won the award to come to the podium, just so that we can recognize them, and I will ask you to please hold your applause until the end. So the undergraduate category, the first prize winner is Anthony Benchivenko. Anthony, if you can come to the podium. The second, okay, I'll wait. Sorry. So I will refrain from telling you much about their work because we do have a student panel after lunch in Concerto Room B, and Anthony will be presenting his work. In the graduate category, we have the first place winner is a student by the name of Pablo Bursman Mendoza from Utrecht University. He's not here, not able to join us, but he won the first place. And then for the graduate category, this was an exceptional year, not only because of the quality of the papers and the turnout that we got, but also because we had a tie for the second place. So the students who won the second prize in the graduate category are Julie Rausenberger. Julie, you could come up. And Julie is from the University of Louvain in Belgium. And the other student who won the second prize graduate category is Kate Gaffney. So Kate is from New York University, and all these students will be presenting today in the student panel. So I would like to ask you for a round of applause for the students. So join us at the student panel right after lunch in room Concerto B. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Elena.
like this run. There's a lot of people who are involved. ASCE is a purely volunteer organization. None of us get paid to work it, but we have a huge community that help provide assistance. And at this point, I'd like to ask if the board members can stand and be recognized. I'd like to, Stephen, Gary. Individuals who have helped who are on the committee, such as Mario. Sylvia, please stand up. Sylvia, who's helped out with the Cuban scholars, thank you so much. Boli, on the hosting committee. Jorge Perez Lopez, who put the program together. Ernesto, our treasurer. Roger Betancourt and Joaquin, who assist on media and also elections. Thank you. I'd like to also recognize Frank Carlos, who is helping us with the young professionals. And I see additional board members to my right, Sergio, Michael. Any additional board members in the audience? Yes, thank you. And Sergio, thank you. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to turn it over for our keynote presentation. Gary Mibarga will be introducing our keynote speaker.
My wife points out that we reach the age where it takes two of us to make one full person. So, I have a great honor today to introduce Mark Frank. Mark Frank is a reporter for the Reuters and Financial Times in Havana. He first went to Havana in 1993, although he had a pedigree there before that because his grandfather had been a correspondent or writer who traveled around with Fidel during the revolution. Mark has a distinction, I think, of being the longest serving Western reporter in Havana. Most get thrown out after a certain number of years, and I'm not sure what he's done to manage to survive, except that his work is always very accurate, always very careful. And I first met Mark when I went to Havana in the intersection in 1997. I was pretty green, and I would meet with him and another group before at the time, basketball players. And they would basically help me understand some of the history and background. I remember one meeting, we would normally have lunch at a restaurant called El Conejo, the Rabbit, which some of you may or may not remember that Fidel at one point decided he was going to solve the problems of protein in Cuba by raising millions of rabbits. And another one of his harebrained schemes. But I think the only remnant of that is the El Conejo restaurant, which apparently still sits there. And like in the Liberties, it was always empty. Great place to talk. I wouldn't say in privacy, because every time I met Mark there, within 5 minutes, somebody would come into the restaurant and sit about 2 tables away from us. Behind my back, where he could see Mark talking. And but in any event, that was working in Havana. What I do remember, in one of our first conversations, is I was trying to understand the Cuban budget. And I spent a great deal of time on it. We could never get any budget documents from the government. We usually got them from the third embassy somewhere, but they were friendly to us. And I was having trouble understanding some things, and was talking to Mark about it. He said, well, you know, you really can't get anything out of the Cuban budget numbers because they have this dollar allocation to the ministries, which is, of course, much more valuable than just the Cuban peso allocations, and that's never published. And that had never occurred to me, and I went back to the embassy and I threw away the 10 pages I'd written. And really didn't try very hard after that. So anyway, I found Mark an incredibly useful source of information over the years. I must add that if you read any major paper written about Cuba, you'll usually find him quoted somewhere. I don't think the Library of Congress could write their papers without Mark. So it's a real pleasure to have him here today. And before I give up the thing, and I promise to be short because he's got a lot to say, I do recommend his book, Cuban Revelations. It goes to that reform period of 2008 to 2013. Things can happen so quickly in Cuba sometimes that it's hard to remember how things all fit together. And I think this is an extremely useful book, and I think it should belong in the library of anybody who studies Cuba, and just as a reference book. So I recommend it highly. It's for sale outside. Okay, at that, I'm going to introduce you to Mark, give him his time, and I'm looking forward to it. Finally made it up to the big time. When I was asked to speak here today, I immediately said yes, because it was such an honor to talk to such a group of, in my opinion, knowledgeable and interested people on the subject of Cuba. So I said yes right away. And of course, I spent the last 3 months petrified about talking to you. Because what can I say to all of you that you don't already know, basically? And of course, one of my great draws in the past was I was inside Havana, and you could get to Cuba. And of course, many of you now can go back and forth yourselves. That's how much things have actually changed. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what I consider to be the main drivers of change, both in terms of Cuba and U.S.-Cuban relations. And then we can look at those drivers and see where they're at right now and get some kind of idea of what might happen in the near to medium future. And at the same time talk briefly about the changes going on in Cuba, how I see them, and how I see what will be happening in the next few years. And I'm going to try to do this all within half an hour so you have plenty of time to ask questions and everything else. And I've been in Cuba a long time, so I've learned to adapt to whatever's around me. And I talk to a lot of groups of Americans. I have dinner with Americans. So I basically, the good news is I don't have a PowerPoint. I have a plot. This is what I use wherever I go here. I just buy a bottle of water like I did upstairs today. I stick it right here, and I'm going to put it on. I figured I better bring a PowerPoint because it's kind of a big room. So there's the bottle. Now that's a Cuban one, Nestle's. That's Nestle's. I don't know what this is here. Okay, and this is my first prop. I have a second surprise for you, but we're going to start with this. And I find this very helpful, actually, talking about Cuba and U.S.-Cuban relations, and I find it very helpful when I think about Cuba even at home. Okay, so of course, what is this? Well, this is the United States. It's very big, it's full of water, it's very heavy, big time, boom. And this, in fact, is Cuba. It's very small, very little water. And there it is. And this scale is not actually way off, okay? Cuba is 3% of our population. We're 90 times the land mass of Cuba. We're 22% of the world economy. They are 0.14% of the world economy. We have a over $18 trillion budget, or GDP. They have maybe 50 billion. Military, science, technology, intelligence, almost whatever subject you want to look at, this scale is perfectly correct. A little bigger for some, a little smaller for others. Okay, so I'm going to very briefly go through 3 laws of history to get into my first point, and you'll see that later on it's also very important. 3 laws of history. First law: human beings organize themselves into larger and larger groupings until we get to the point of civilization. Civilizations usually have core societies. Core societies are wealthier and more powerful. They'll act a little bit like a hurricane. They suck in what's around them and become more powerful and more wealthy. In history, that's not a negative thing because that allows for science, culture, thought to progress. And core societies do tend to dominate the small countries around them, and even farther away. Second law of history: geography is like birth, pure luck. And there's where Cuba was born. And the third law of history is that people are schmucks over time. There's a guy named Ian Morris, a Stanford University history professor, who wrote a great book called Why the West Rules for Now. And he says people, masses of people over time are motivated by sloth, fear, and greed. And then he explains, masses of people over time look for more efficient, profitable, and safer ways to live. It sounds exactly right to me. Okay, so between 1898 and 1959, for the epoch, the relationship between this country and this country were exactly what you would expect, given the laws of history. Nothing strange about what was going on at all in the grand scope of things. And then, of course, the Cuban Revolution came along, and one of Fidel Castro's great feats was that he managed to stop those laws in their tracks and reverse them, not for a few years, but for a long, long time. Look at this, quite remarkable. And that brings me to the first driver of change in Cuba. Fidel Castro, it doesn't matter what you think of him. The fact was he was one of the most important personalities of the last half century, like it or not. He was, in fact, clearly an historic phenomenon, an historic anomaly. That doesn't mean good or bad. That's what he was. And he ran Cuba as only he saw fit, as only he could, and get away with it for half a century. Then, 11 years ago, almost to this day, he got very ill, very sick. If you look at a photo of him the day he got sick, 9 months later when he came out of it, kind of, physically a different person, never again to be the iconic figure that he was. And he lost, of course, one of his most important gifts, his oratory, never to give another Fidel Castro speech. So for 11 years now, in my opinion, close to it, Cuba has not been run by an historic anomaly. Cuba's been run by normal people, by mortals. And historically speaking, the odds of another historic anomaly coming out of this little place, historically speaking, are more or less zero. Okay. Obviously, whether you want the place to totally change, you just want to keep what you got, everybody's going to have to go about things very, very differently. Okay? So the first reason Cuba's changing is the obvious one. Okay? No more Fidel Castro. And that began long before November of last year. Second, all right, for the U.S., All right, I'm going to talk now about the second driver. All right, the second driver of change is very simple. The Cold War ended a long time ago. And that was a geopolitical earthquake of unbelievable proportions, still changing the world. And in fact, it changed the Western Hemisphere dramatically, and it changed it for the better. Since the end of the Cold War, there hasn't been one military coup, dictatorship, or slaughter in all of Latin America or the Caribbean. Since the end of the Cold War, more or less, so again, this may be changing right now, more or less every country's had some kind of multi-party system, good or bad, some kind, except for Cuba. This is, of course, remarkable if you know the history, and a wondrous thing. And of course, now the final guerrilla war is ending. Okay, well, the end of the Cold War also brought globalization. It also brought the internet. It also brought everything going on now in terms of communications technology. And it brought a period when lots of different groupings of countries kind of banded together to strike a better deal in the big, bad, globalized world. And in fact, as you know, for a period of time in Latin America and the Caribbean, there was a process of political and economic integration taking place separate from the United States and Canada and the OAS. We're talking history here to understand what's happened up to now. We all know that right now that's all changing again. Okay, and so what was kind of strange is that the more democratic the region became and the more they kind of advanced in this integration process, the more they welcomed with open arms one-party Cuba. That's counterintuitive. One would think it would be the exact opposite. But as I will quickly point out now, it's not. And that will explain the first reason the U.S. is changing. And this takes a while, but just so you know, I have the 10 seconds here. This is my surprise at the end. This is my kicker that will explain everything you need to know about U.S. policy. Okay? It's only 9 seconds long, but you've got to bear with me for 9 minutes to get there. Okay? Then the last point's really nice, and you're all involved in the last point. Okay, so 1994, President Clinton calls the first Summit of the Americas here in Miami. They're going to happen every 3 years. Different countries are summits, more or less. That's when we roll out our post-Cold War policies, right? 1994. Let's move up to 2009 when President Obama takes office. By then, basically, we've lost more influence than ever in our history in the region. And by then, the pink tide is rising. Okay, and President Obama takes office. And the majority of heads of state are demanding that we invite Cuba to our summits. They say, hey, Cuba's being invited to the Ibero-American summits. What's your problem? Poor Obama faces his first America summit 4 months after taking office in Trinidad and Tobago. So he gets all this blowback right away from Latin America, Caribbean, on Cuba, and on other issues. So he's very sensitive to this. He doesn't like our policy. Anyhow, what does he make his first and most important reform, in my opinion? Allowing Cuban Americans to do what they feel like in their own country, Cuba. Well, he makes that reform 4 days before his first America summit. No accident. And then he says, Raul, it's your turn. He goes off to Trinidad and Tobago, and his advisors complain that even so, he has to waste up to 30% of his time talking about our policy towards 1/7 of 1% of the world population, which is Cuba, instead of other matters. Fast forward, the famous Cartagena, Colombia summit, 5 years ago, a little more. What happens there? Well, that's the peak of the pink tide. Every head of state in the room, except for Canada and the U.S., vote to include in our final declaration a condemnation of our policy. And so, we veto our own final declaration. And the heads of state, and that wouldn't happen today, but at that point in history it did, the heads of state announced they will never attend another summit in the Western Hemisphere, ours or anybody else's, unless Cuba's invited. Then they go to Havana and they hold their own summit. The famous Panama Summit, where finally Obama and Raul meet. Look it up. What happens in September 2014, before we make our announcement in December? The president of Panama holds a press conference and announces that he's decided, since Panama is his country, that he's going to invite Cuba and Raul Castro to our summit in his country, and if we don't like it, we can stay home. Look it up. He may have known what was cooking, but that's exactly what happened, okay? So look, folks, very quickly, Colombia, Panama, they are not Venezuela, they are not Bolivia, fairly conservative governments, very close allies of the United States. What do they care? What's this about? Well, it's about two things. One, a decision by Latin America and the Caribbean at this period, that in fact the region is a hell of a lot better place than it used to be when the Cubans had their revolution, etc., the Cold War. And that, you know, to make themselves whole, they got to get the rest of the family over here to this new place. And Cuba, of course, is part of the region. And that's very hard to do if this is the situation, right? How are you going to get them over there? And then, of course, for some people in Latin America, the Caribbean, this became kind of a symbol. Symbols are very bad. A symbol of how we treated them in a certain period in their history. And so that's why they made such a fuss at the time. And it's undeniable they did make a fuss. Okay, look, very quickly, I'm almost done. What does this do for Cuba? Why is it the second reason Cuba's changing? Well, you can imagine how they felt when the Soviets fell. Wow, big trouble. Not only all along in front of the U.S., but, you know, the Chinese hated them. They sided with the Soviets in the Sino-Soviet dispute. They were really all alone. Kind of like a chihuahua hanging by his ankles in front of a grizzly bear that had been poking for 50 years. Not a nice place to be. Okay, well, you know, that's all changed since then, of course. They now have normal relations, and they have had normal relations for 2 decades with every country in the Western Hemisphere except for the United States. And they now basically have normal relations with every country in the world except for the United States. And of course, that makes them feel a little more comfortable negotiating with us. And it gives them a bigger comfort zone to make the changes that they have to make. And lucky for them, this happens at the same time that Fidel Castro moves on. So it makes it easier for them to do what they have to do. Okay, final point, and then we'll get to why that matters today, and then I'll be done. Are we okay so far? Okay. Final point. You all know better than me that since the 1959 revolution in Cuba, for decades, there was very, very little contact between Cubans living abroad and Cubans living inside the country. That's just the way it was. There was hardly any visits, any letters, any phone calls, any money. A very, very difficult time for all Cubans because of how close they are as families. Well, let's look at the year 2014, the last year that I have all the data. Before normalization, well, that's a lot better. 70 million phone calls from Cuba to the United States, better than 0. Doesn't include emails, and it doesn't include internet, because internet didn't start until 2015. 2014. 400,000 Cubans living abroad visited their homeland, including 300,000 from the United States. 2014, more Cubans traveled abroad because they were then free to travel All they needed was their passport, their visa, and some money. And we started giving 5-year visas to Cubans so they could go back and forth. I have a friend, she has a daughter, 5 grandkids here in the States. She goes back, she comes back, takes care of her mom, 85 years old, goes back, no problem. Okay, so, why is this so important? You know why. Right? First, Cubans are like the Irish or the Italians. Very large, historically speaking, very large extended families. And those families are extraordinarily tight, right? My wife, when I was courting her 20-something years ago, she dragged me around the island and I had to meet all 18 of her aunts and uncles. Every one. And remember their name at least for a few hours. I'm not kidding you, honest, I'm not really, I'm serious. I go, what the hell is it? But it was actually wonderful for me as a journalist, because it's very hard to be a journalist here, and I got a chance to meet people all around the country, and they had to actually be nice to me and talk. So it's well worth it, but it was quite something. And then, of course, after I married her, I began to figure out, even worse, over 50 first cousins, brothers and sisters. Nobody knocks, nobody calls. People come hang out in your apartment, all they want. I used to say that I lived in a 24-hour-a-day pajama party. And in fact, this is a true story, I finally had to kick one of the first cousins out after she stayed in my house for a year and a half. and to do it, I had to politic with cousins like in Camberway and other places. So my wife's preferred cousins to get them to convince her that really it was a bit much. He might leave you, dear, if you don't get rid of him. So, okay, why is this so important? Very briefly. When I come here to the United States from my culture, right, I want to see 3 or 4 family members. I'm going to go out in my neighborhoods. Nobody's going to know who I am, and nobody cares. Well, the second thing about Cubans, of course, is that they're very wonderfully social, warm, neighborly people. And in Cuba, at least people still have time kind of to hang out in every small town in the country, and in every small barrio in every city, and get to at least know everybody's dirty laundry and gossip, and they get to know the older people and who needs help. Where I live, we all kind of let some of these older people do our messages and some messages, go around and get stuff for us and pay them. And of course, they also know when people leave for greener pastures. And unfortunately, they know if they make it or not. And they also know where they are, and they know when they're going to come back to visit. So when a Cuban American goes, as far as I can tell, you can answer better than me, when a Cuban American goes to Cuba, they try to see as much of their family as they can, and their family tries to see them. And the same when a Cuban comes here to Miami. And when they walk out into their small town or barrio, everybody knows they're there, and everybody wants to chit and chat and catch up and talk and everything else. Okay. Well, last I heard, Cubans are human beings, which means that they have always talked about their country and its future, inside and outside the country. What is new is they're talking to each other face to face. And because Cuba is at such a critical moment in its history, they're talking quite a bit about their country and its future. So what we have for the first time since 1959, and it's now been going on for 4 or 5 years, is a massive discussion between all Cubans, inside and outside the country, about Cuba and its future. This is absolutely remarkable, not just from a humanitarian point of view. Absolutely remarkable. It's already changing Cuba. It's already changing here. And it's an organic process, a massive organic process, a very emotional process.
a very salient process. It's the famous genie that's been let out of the bottle that will never get back in, okay? So, let's take a look at those three drivers and see what we can tell about the future. Okay, driver one. Well, Fidel died in November. Raul Castro has announced that everybody else who fought with Fidel Castro has to be out of office, both the party and the government, or now within the next 3.5 years. So we can expect that driver to continue without it. That driver is still very much in force in Cuba. The second driver, not so good. As you know, basically the integration process in Latin America, the Caribbean, has been probably destroyed. And the presidency here is very different. So this will be somewhat of a, they're already very slow and cautious, so make them a little more nervous. The third driver is also alive and well. Neither side is touching. Donald Trump did not touch what's going on between Cuban Americans and Cubans. Very important. Okay, so we can expect with these three drivers that change more or less will continue, both in terms of Cuba and, in my opinion, over time, between the U.S. and Cuba. Why? Well, let's go back to those laws of history. When I talk to Americans, I say, you know, who are you? What are those direct flights that brought you here? What is that roaming agreement you have? Hey, look, Carnival Cruise is coming into Havana Bay. What's the U.S. Embassy? What was Obama doing walking around Cuba? All that is nothing more than the weight of those laws of history reimposing themselves on the relationship between these two countries. That's what that is. And it's inevitable over time that that will happen. All Obama was doing was pushing those laws forward. Cuba, that's even more interesting. They decided they need some kind of new accommodation with the United States, and they're willing to sit down and negotiate to try to figure out how to do that. So that's what that all is. So that, I don't think that's over either, personally. We'll see what happens. And most it's going to be is a little blip. You talk to the Europeans right now who put in a lot of architecture after normalization, financial architectures, etc., to get into Cuba before us, or compete with us. And you ask them, well, you know, what are you going to do now that Trump maybe is going to change US policy? He's not really going to change it that much, and if he wants to give us a little more time to beat you here, great. Nobody's backing off the deals that were done at the Paris Club and everything else that all these countries have done to start to penetrate into Cuba. Okay, so change. We're still okay? We're almost done. This, there we go, my second prop. Isn't that cute? That's a Cuban-made funnel. Okay, now if you look at that funnel, I guess I don't have to hold this up, you can all look at it on the screen. And you're so used to looking at PowerPoints, you probably are more comfortable doing that. Though I like playing with my toys. Anyhow, here's the funnel. Okay, this does not represent economic growth in Cuba. What this represents is policy change and change in the consciousness of what's known as the gray zone, which is all the people working inside, people who were born and bred there, who live there, who work there, who nevertheless are not happy, who want change. Maybe not the change that I want, but they want change. And the more they become conscious, the more that's the case. Okay, so if you look at this, there's a couple of things you see, and then I'll explain. First thing you see is that the outside doesn't change that much, right? It's red, same material. It's a little more flexible. What is that? That's what's not changed, okay? Three things. Cuba, the current Cuban government's worldview and grand strategy, the one-party system, and state domination of the economy and central planning. Some people say only that and go, well, nothing's changed. They miss all of this. What is this? This is a whole series of policy changes. What's very interesting is that some people think that what's going on in Cuba is kind of like during the Soviet period, when they'd get a little pragmatic for a few years and they'd run away and get more ideological. And what I have here is something very different. That is, the change that's happening is not back and forth. What happens is the change is building on previous change. Okay, and so if you look at that first line down there at the bottom, that first line is when the Soviet Union falls. Okay? The second line is when Fidel Castro gets sick. And the third line is when all the revolutionaries are out of office or dead, and it's a whole new generation, post-revolution in power. So you have basically 3 phases of change. First phase, that first phase is tactical. Fidel says that's when everything begins to change. It's not really Fidel's death or his getting ill. Soviets fall and things do begin to change in Cuba. Without any question, the model begins to change, right? Fidel says it's tactical concessions to the enemy and we're going to get rid of it, right? So international tourism, foreign investment, some small business, a bit of an improvement in relations with the diaspora because they need money, communications, it all begins to change somewhat. Because I can go through any issue and show you the change. Okay, well, and once in the second period, what happens is that many of those initial changes all of a sudden become strategic. They're no longer something that's going to be taken away. They become part of the model into the future. And they become broader and deeper. That's not a back and forth. That's clearly a moving forward. And then the third level we'll have to see. So I'm going to just give a couple of quick examples. Travel. Soviet period, no travel, except to communist countries with permission. First phase of change, you can now travel to capitalist countries, but with permission. Second phase of change, you can now travel basically without permission. Building one on the other. Communications, probably the most important thing, folks. Yes, there's some backtracking going on now in Cuba, but not in communications. Communications, Soviet phase, basically no communications. 3 phones for every 10 homes. I'm talking internal communications, let alone external. Very little. You have to be a little careful because those who were around probably remember every home did have a big black radio built by the Soviets, and they were always shortwave. So everybody could listen to the outside world, and of course many people learned languages that way. But basic communications, both internally and with the outside world, were really tightly controlled. Well, in the first phase of change, which coincides also in many ways with cell phones and everything else, what do you get? Well, first of all, they realize that the internet and cell phones are needed for the elite, and the elite begins to get it. Second, they realize to have tourism and foreign investment, they need it for the tourists and for the foreign investment. Okay, next phase of change going on right now. Well, all of a sudden, what's happening? Everybody gets it, right? Everybody can have a cell phone. You now have 5-6 million cell phones running around Cuba. The most important thing about that is not talking to here. The most important thing about that is Cubans talking to each other inside the country. And, of course, you have more and more internet. We've seen the leaked documents on what they plan. This is going to continue into the third phase, become broader. It's going to move into people's homes, etc. So we see, again, a building of the reforms. Nobody's reforming and then taking away. They're building on the reforms that they've already done. I can go on. I guess maybe that's enough. Are you happy, or you want me to give you more examples? You want to just start asking questions, or I can keep going? It's up to whoever the boss is here. I don't know. What do you want to do? Keep going. You love me. And I was so petrified to talk to you, especially you. I've seen you in action. So anyhow, all right, so I'll give you a few other examples. Foreign investment, I guess, foreign investment. Soviet period, no foreign investment. The Soviets never owned it, no foreign investment. First period, foreign investment, very tight rules. And by near the end of that first period, Fidel's trying to get rid of the foreign investment. Second phase of change, foreign investment. It's going to become part of our future, they say. And it's going to become a driver, an important driver of our development in the future. They do new regulations for foreign investment and seem to at least try to get more foreign investment. Very different situation. I think probably in this next phase coming up, there'll be a lot of foreign investment. Small business, right? The use of other people's labor. Soviet period, none, at least legally. First period of change, basically still illegal. You can have a small business, but you have to keep it inside the family. You can't really hire labor, but you can have some small business. In the countryside, you know, farm labor, which has always existed, is still, we pretend it doesn't exist. Next phase, that's wide open. Small business can exploit labor. You pay a labor tax up to how many people you have working for you, including as high as you want, basically. And, of course, in the countryside, they allow farm labor for the first time. And what we get for the first time there, too, which is very important, is the skilled trades and other people can sell their own labor out. For example, a bricklayer doesn't have to sell anymore to the state. They can sell to a private contractor, a cooperative, or just they themselves can sell their labor. So we have the beginnings of a labor market for the first time, too, at least an open one. And that, you know, again, in my opinion, we'll have to see what happens in the next phase. You want the really complicated one? Then I'll be done. Most complicated one. The relationship between the government and the government. Well, we know what did it look like in the Soviet period. Well, pretty simple. The state ran everything directly, except in farming. So wherever you worked for the state directly. In farming, they gave you all the inputs, you gave them all the outputs. Basically, what that all equaled is that there's only like 5 wage scales that were very close together and very low. And basically, farmers, it was the same situation. They were caught in that same situation. And nobody was allowed money from abroad. So the mass of people consumed more or less the same. Not the elite, the mass. And all the money went to the state. And then the state basically gave it back to people and subsidized everything. That's why it was paternalistic, right? So it wasn't just health, education, transportation, utilities. No. It was clothing. We joke all the time. It used to be on Mother's Day, they cooked 2 million chocolate cakes. They give them to all the moms. Oh, I thought that was kind of nice. And of course, now when we know young people who get married, we tell them, too bad this isn't the 1980s. They used to give you a whole wedding with everything, and you got to go to a hotel of your choice for 3 days on your honeymoon. That's why everybody got married like every 3 months. if you look at the statistics, you can see that the difference when they stopped that subsidy in marriages and divorces. That's why you don't subsidize things like that, right? But I swear, you can look at that. Okay, so basically they gave everything to the state. The state gave it all back to them in subsidies, and nobody paid taxes. Well, look at the new model that they're talking about now. Right? The new model is the government is going to regulate and tax. We're going to cut all subsidies except for health, education, sports, culture, and Social Security. And you're going to pay us money. Wow, that's a huge change. It begins in the first period only in the sense that the state no longer can give back. Right? The big change in the first period is that basically the state's bankrupt and can't, they keep the model, but the part that gets totally destroyed is the state's paternalism back, except there's some very basic things, which is why everything goes downhill in many ways in terms of people's lives. So in the second phase, they go, no, we're going to change the whole model. So how are they changing the model? Well, first of all, the government's going to get out of business, and we're going to have independent state businesses, not just nationally, but very important in terms of corruption, provincially and in the municipalities. So the state's going to be there. They're going to have these companies, but you're not going to work directly for the state anymore. The state's going to regulate you and tax you, right? And the normal person is going to have to pay taxes, and they're going to get less from the government. Well, I joke that basically they must have become suicidal. Because, I remember the day that they passed like this huge, like the first time it was like their first tax code. It was like, wow, this is like so cool. Like an entire tax code, right? And, our tax code is what, 78,000 pages last I heard. Theirs has everything in it. Most of it hasn't been applied yet, but they got like 19 taxes. They have all kinds of taxes. And it's only like 17 pages long. So it's got a lot of work to do. But the fact was, I was listening to the radio, and the state commentators are going, hey, Joe, it used to be that the government gave me everything. But, now that we got to pay them, we have a right to ask them what the hell they're doing. Right, so when you change a model, when everybody hands it all to you, you give it all back, and you don't pay taxes, to a model where basically you're not giving them that much and they're paying you taxes, well, you're asking, of course, for a very different situation between the government and the government in the long term. So we're in the second phase here, and of course it's gone much slower than anybody planned. As we all know, that 5 years has now turned into 10 or 15 or whatever. But they continue, if you look at the new reforms or the revised reforms, there's no real change in that, okay? That they're still going to move to that new model of government. And that'll be very interesting when they get there, if they get there, right? So that would be another example that I would give. But again, it's not, to me, except, yes, there's nobody more upset than me on their backtracking in agriculture. Serious backtracking, not just in practice, but in writing. Basically, they decided to dump the market reforms in distribution and go back to the state dominating all that. A disastrous decision for many, many reasons. But still, the motion is in a certain direction, and what's going on inside there now in terms of how people think? Well, like I say in my book, when all of a sudden you take away a restriction, like, okay, you can now sell your home. Well, why the hell did you put me through all that stuff in the first place? So as you deregulate, people become more conscious about regulation and more like, what are you doing? Right? So the consciousness builds through all this, and you can now see the consciousness even in government. They're coming up to a new election cycle in Cuba. And basically, they had promised to make a few minor reforms, and they've been so swamped by the crisis that they're in my opinion, they haven't had time to do anything. And so, they're basically running around trying to explain their system to all the young people at the colleges and everything else, because people are more and more conscious that there's a problem here. Right? There is a rising consciousness in Cuba. It doesn't mean they want to copy us necessarily, but it means they are not happy campers. So, and there's no reason to think that's going to change. And so, the final point I'll make is that, we are coming now into a period where there's going to be a whole new leadership in Cuba. And for the first time, none of them will have what I would call historic legitimacy. For at least many people in Cuba. No Fidel, no Raul. The whole leadership will be people who were basically born after the revolution and who were spit out by the system. Okay, it's a very different situation developing over the next 5 or 10 years. And they are going to have to do an awful good job. Otherwise, they're going to have a crisis of political legitimacy there, eventually. In my opinion, not right now, but eventually, because whatever you think around, stuff, they lend a great deal of legitimacy to a system because of who they are. In the history for many people, in the eyes of many people. That period's now over. Whoever gets in power now is going to have to do a damn good job. Without any question. And so we'll see how that plays out, in my opinion, in the next phase. Not so much in this phase, in the next phase. Yes, I know, for people who are impatient or whatever. But I think it's a realistic perspective on, what to expect in Cuba. Nothing's going to blow up in Cuba in the next few years or something. It's just not how I see the situation. But yes, there is change. Yes, it's in a clear direction. It's not back and forth. For all these reasons that I already talked to, and we can expect that to continue, in my opinion, even with little backs and forths in different places. And again, I understand that, real life is they do something today and a lot of people got hurt, or they do something today and everybody's happy. But we're talking like kind of more of a grand sweep and not getting caught up in the little things that happen every day, and those little things are big things for a lot of people. So that would be kind of what I have to say. I hope it was helpful. I don't know if it was, because again, people frighten me. But it's the best I could do, and trust me, I spent 3 months doing nothing else but thinking about it. So this is what I go, the next part, like when I talk to people in Cuba, I give them 3 choices. I talk about what's going on in Cuba, talk about the drivers, or I call it the meat grinder, which is, I don't talk, and you just ask me questions, and I'm forced to try to think and answer them without practice. So, if you have any questions, let's go. Drive me against the wall, I don't mind. I don't know, Mark, this is good, they're all friends, so I could ask, I can call on them.
You were supposed to read something?
Yeah.
The envelope.
Oh, that's the worst I forgot. Okay. I'm going to know what it was. It's amazing. I practiced this 1,000 times. I still forgot this. It's impossible. That's why I took notes. I have notes right here, but of course I didn't look at them. Okay, this is, proof of the pudding that the main reason the U.S. is changing is geopolitical, and has nothing to do with Cuba. Okay, so this is President Obama's State of the Union address last year, 2016, his last State of the Union address. He devotes about 10 seconds to Cuba. Okay, and he doesn't talk about Cuba. What does he say? For 50 years of isolating Cuba has failed to promote democracy, setting us, the United States, back in Latin America. I'll give you a copy, you don't have to take it. That's why we restored diplomatic relations, opened the door to travel and commerce, and positioned ourselves to improve the lives of the Cuban people. You want to consolidate our leadership and credibility in the hemisphere? Recognize that the Cold War is over. Lift the embargo. It couldn't be clearer. It's nothing to do with Cuba. Cuba was, he inherited, again, a very difficult situation with the region. He worked, in my opinion, very hard for 8 years to change it, and we see some of those results right now happening. And they are a spillover from his time in office. And basically, Cuba was attacked within a larger effort to improve our positioning in the region. And that's basically what he says here. And I think that's correct. I think that's the main driver. I think also we see that Cuba's changing, so of course, we think it might make sense to get involved and steer things in our direction. And I think there is pressure on us to change from other parts of the world, and also, I think, from many people in the United States, and the politics are changing here. But I really think the main driver was geopolitical and made a lot of sense, and actually was really worked somewhat over time in terms of U.S. interests in the region. Okay, so that's why that's what he says. You can see it, nothing in there but pure hemisphere. No, that's why I don't like other people introducing me, because they always screw it up, and then I have to like make it look bad. Well, no, what's true is my grandmother was a guy named Waldo Frank. Okay, so you read my grandpa, so I answered your question. Nobody else cares about my grandpa. Yes, he was. When I read one of his books, I go, boy, you really suck. And I go, what am I even bothering you writing? He's a very good writer. Yes, well, my hero. You know, when they invited me to talk, I said, what are you doing inviting me when you have people like Mesa Largo talking? What are you doing? And he said, no, we have all kinds of people who don't know anything. You can come talk. Because the last time I was here, you're the one who gave the talk. I go, come on, you're going to put me in the same podium? You're nuts.
You are reading a lot about the urban program. Nobody goes to a service program. And I was reading the proceedings of the National Assembly last 15, and I thought there would be some movement there because they have been experimenting with this for 4 years, and they are making more experiments. There are no new ones approved. They are checking all the deviations that happened with the previous. What is happening?
Yeah, it's not just the cooperatives. I think it's also with the small businesses as well. This is kind of they're doing a. We don't know because we've got to see what the regulations are that they come up with now. But they're doing this. Oh my God. This isn't working so well because everybody's like buying on the black market and cheating on taxes. Like, what else is new? What I mean, all of a sudden they're using this to say, no, we're really going to have to take a closer look at things, etc. So they're taking a closer look at things. They did basically stop the cooperatives for a year, they said, and it's now more than a year to like fine-tune it. They always said it was kind of an experiment. What's happened with the cooperatives depends on the cooperatives, right? So you have some very large construction cooperatives with like 100 people, 200 people. Basically, it functions very much as you would expect. Somebody who worked in the state, leaves the state, starts a quote-unquote cooperative, uses the contacts in the state, like all subcontracting with government, right? Nothing new. You know, to basically get contracts, and they all of a sudden claim to discover that there's some kind of problem with this. And then you also have smaller ones, like, for example, the restaurants in the van. I have a very good friend who kind of is the person in charge of looking at those restaurants. And basically some are working very well. Others, you know, basically what they're saying is, look, because, you know, these cooperatives are not what they said, okay? Because originally they said that the cooperatives would be on a level playing field with the privates. And instead, the cooperatives are getting subsidized stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more, they're not quite what they claimed in the first place. And they have a better tax system, too. But one of the things that's happening is that these cooperatives, they start doing well, they run out of their supply from the state within a week or two, and then they're stuck in the same position as all the privates. The only thing they can really do is either buy stuff for huge markups at the retail level or hit the black market like everybody else to compete. And so that's become a huge problem for them because that they've identified this, but how do you resolve that without really, doing a wholesale system for everybody and everything else? So they've run into problems. I don't think they're going to end the cooperatives, personally. But I think, they slowed it down and now that they'll start doing more. They're just trying to figure out how to deal with it. So, for example, transportation cooperatives, the one in Havana is working great for them. And again, it's not totally independent. Again, it's linked to the state, but it's booming. It does very well. You can look at the statistics, more and more people, moving more and more people out. But that same model in Artemisa turned out to be a total disaster. And so, they're just trying to figure out how to deal with it. I don't think they're going to stop it, but I'm kind of more worried about what kind of controls they're going to put on private business, actually, than I am on the co-op. But again, I don't think they're going to stop it. It's very hard to say, how much of what they're talking about is just rhetoric for their base, for a certain part of their base. Look, I hate to be crude, but I will be crude. As you know, 98.5% of our genes are identical to a chimpanzee. Sorry, it's just fact. And we have more in common with a chimpanzee than a horse does with a zebra. Genetics. Put two chimpanzees in two cages. True experiments. Give them both a carrot. Oh, thank you. We're going to eat our carrots. This is wonderful, delicious. The next day, come back. Give one chimpanzee a carrot. Give the other a banana. The chimpanzee with a carrot will throw it back in your face. Literally. Now he wants a banana. Well, you have this kind of going on in Cuba a little bit in the sense that some people see people doing a little better, and instead of thinking maybe it's a wonderful thing for their country, they think, well, why don't I? It's not fair. And they're throwing the carrot back into Raul's face. So the question is, how much are they just trying to manage that while they continue to move forwards? And how much is really that they're going to do serious backtracking? I don't personally think they're going to do serious backtracking. But sure, a little adjustment here or there. Like I said, for the few months where the new regs more or less work before they fall apart, sure, it's going to be a little worse. But in the end, I don't see any way to stop what's going on. Nor do they really want to. I mean, if you look at tourism. Which in some ways might be a model for other sectors in the future. What does it look like? Well, the state still owns most of the stock, right? But most of it's managed by foreign companies, not the state. And it's completely dependent now on a huge and very vibrant private sector that interacts with it. And they still try, what happens with that interaction? Well, the tourism industry tries to subcontract stuff, and people really don't want it. The successful ones go, no, because they never pay. Leave me alone. So, you still have this kind of like back and forth going on, but basically, a very different kind of model from what exists now, kind of a transition model that maybe you would expect if there's other sectors that are somewhat similar that you could see, right? Where, yes, the state still basically owns everything, but basically it's all being run by foreign companies. And totally interacting with this huge private sector, this growing private sector. I don't know. I mean, that's again. He didn't tell. I told him what he should tell you is what I tell people. Look, I'm not a trained journalist, and I'm definitely not a trained economist. And that's a good thing, right? Because if I was a trained journalist, I couldn't cover Cuba. You follow the rules, you're not going to get anywhere. And of course, if I was a trained economist, I wouldn't know what to do. So you're the economist. So I don't really want to get into the details of economy. I can cover what they're doing, but I can't explain any of it. I rely on Omar and everybody else to do that. So anyhow, thank you.
I had a question. How much economic change can really take place without beginning to undermine the existing political structure.
Well, changing that, yeah. I mean, that's really the question, right? Is how much, I mean, it's not just, to me, it's not just the political structure. It's, for example, the monopoly on foreign trade. It holds back everything. So yeah, I think it probably has its limits, and we have to see what happens when they reach those limits. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's true, but I don't know what will happen. I assume what happens is they have no choice. Remember, masses of people move in history looking for more efficient, profitable, and safe ways to survive. And usually they don't even know they're doing it, right? So I would assume that it's going to be playing out at some point. But I don't, I had another prop, but it got taken at Cuban Customs, my Torah cards. So, there's a limit to what I can talk about in the future.
I was wondering if you could tell us like 2 or 3 conditions that have to be met in order to be a successful foreign correspondent, foreign journalist within Cuba.
So cute. I assume this is not being recorded or covered. Any members of the press here? No, I'm kidding. Actually, I was quoted more in the WikiLeaks cables out of Cuba than any other foreign journalist. But it wasn't a problem because everything I say, I write. So I don't worry about it. Everything they send as cables, Gary, I don't know why you're sending those cables. Actually, I was writing the same thing, so I didn't get any trouble. Be a successful foreign journalist in Cuba. Well, the best way to be a successful foreign journalist in Cuba is to get thrown out. Then you get famous. It's not complicated. I mean, people think, well, if the person is thrown out, they must be really doing a good job, and they're really brave, and they're really courageous, and they got thrown out, and they must be really good journalists. But I know people who actually, really honestly, wrote a book, got themselves thrown out. So, but in general, I don't know. I mean, to be a good foreign correspondent in Cuba is the same as being a good foreign correspondent anywhere else. I don't think there's a huge difference. I think what you have to do is adapt. Like, for example, in my book, right, I use an example of a cub reporter. So, you're a cub reporter, and you get assigned to the crime beat for a newspaper. The crime beat depends on the police. You can't do your job if the police don't talk to you. So, that's fine until you discover a little police brutality or corruption. Well, if you cover it, no cop will ever talk to you again. And you're going to lose your job. So, ethically speaking, that story has to come out, right? But there's nothing saying that you have to write it, except your own ego. So it's perfectly possible, and I've done this a few times in Cuba, honestly, is you run into a certain story that if you really discover it yourself, you're probably going to be thrown out. Well, you just bury your ego, hand the notes to another reporter, and don't worry about it. Ethically, it's fine. So I think to be a good foreign correspondent in Cuba, one, you have to try as best you can to be objective. Like any other correspondent, which is an impossible thing to do, but that's what you have to try to do. 2, you have to be very creative and find ways to get stories out that are creative. And 3, if you're going to stay as long as me, you've got to be crazy. I mean, most foreign journalists don't hang out there forever. They come in for 2 or 3 years, whatever, very much acceptable. To be a good foreign journalist in Cuba, I think, is very different. Like, Reuters likes to move people around, like diplomats, correctly so. But in a place like Cuba, it's really helpful to have somebody who's built up relationships over like a long, long period of time, because sourcing is so difficult. So the longer you've been here, the more people you know, and the more they come to trust you, the more you can actually kind of find out what's going on. So I think, in the case of Cuba, I think length of stay, well, on the one hand, it doesn't mean the danger of being more like going native. On the other side, it's helpful because it's such a difficult place to cover. and getting any kind of real sourcing is almost impossible unless you've been there a long, long time, or you marry my wife. I don't know if I answered. I don't know how to. I mean, you have to make decisions. I mean, this idea that journalists never make decisions is we all know this. We're not. It's ridiculous. Every journalist to do his job or her job makes 100 decisions a day. Every editor to do their job makes 100 decisions a day. You have to try to keep certain principles as you make those decisions. But you're making decisions all the time. Part of it is just being intelligent enough. For example, when you come to a place like this, be careful what you say and don't say. It's not complicated. It's not being a bad journalist, it's just understanding your environment. Right? So, I mean, that's just... So I think part of it is just understanding the situation you're in. And I don't know if I answered you at all. I have no idea. Huh? Yeah, I mean, just talking about the press in Cuba, just very briefly, I think it's very important. And I'm happy to talk about it. There's 3 types of journalists in Cuba. There's foreign journalists. There's journalists who work for the state media, and now more than ever, there's journalists who don't work either for the foreign media or the state, and who people classify in different ways depending on their politics. Okay, being a foreign journalist in Cuba is the safest job in the world. Not one foreign journalist since revolution has been tortured, imprisoned, or killed. Not one. All they do to us is yell and scream at us. Send us this with email with red and blue, and in my case go, oh Mark, you've been here so long, how could you say such things about our country? Or in the worst case, they throw you out, which again is not bad for your career, except for a few cases where people have built lives. I can think of a few cases where it was it. So being a foreign journalist, in my opinion, is the hardest thing for us is no access, 0 access. It's very difficult to do the job, but it's not dangerous at all. Okay, being a state journalist, very difficult job, supervised. Basically, you're considered kind of high enough up in the hierarchy of information that leaking information to diplomats or other foreign journalists is a serious matter. Even in a few cases, you might end up, if they think you're getting money, going to prison for a while. So not as easy. And then, independent journalists, most of them, they make their lives miserable day and night. End of story. Not complicated. Very rarely, in my opinion, do they bloody them in prison and whatever, but yes, they make their lives miserable. Without any question. All of us complain we have the exact same problem. So the state journalists, have become much more outspoken. And they've had a number of congresses where actually they've published, the ponencias on the situation. And, we're reading them, we're going, that sounds like us. The exact same problems. No access. Totally couldn't. You can't get any access. Not even they can get any access. So no spokespeople. No, it's just So that's the kind of situation. But it's also changing rapidly and dramatically, just like it did here, right, where we've lost most of the print media. Basically, with internet, right, internet is very much now in Cuba. The big discussion within Cuban television is nothing more than the young people saying, come on, we got to get our act together. Don't you understand nobody's watching us anymore? And the older people going, And they talk about it openly, and they fight about it, and they discuss it. It's not, that is going on. So basically, everything is changing. Internet obviously changes the whole world, changes how everybody governs, changes how everybody gets their news, and it's going to do the exact same thing in Cuba, and it's already doing it. It's not that complicated. And the state media, if it doesn't get its act together, nobody's going to watch them. Not complicated. No, good. That chicken's kind of cold, but I'm going to eat it. One last thing, just so you know, I've decided to donate my plane fare to ASCE.
We will reconvene at 2:45.